It is Friday, February 28th, and I am Josh Askvig, State Director for AARP of North Dakota. With me, as always, is our Advocacy Director, Janelle Most. Janelle, I'm feeling a little bit like Bon Jovi today. How about you?
Oh, I always feel like Bon Jovi. Well, not exactly like Bon Jovi, but you know what? We are halfway there. That's
Halfway
what
there.
this is about, right?
Yeah, I would sing, but then we would lose all of our viewers, and we don't want to do that. So, hey, we're at the halfway point of the session, also affectionately known as crossover. And we thought that today would be a good day to kind of just do a quick rundown of where we're at. So, before we go through one by one, Janelle, you want to remind everybody what our four priorities were headed into this legislative session?
Yeah, we were focused on fraud, making sure we have some good consumer protections in place, making sure folks can afford their prescription drugs. Affordable housing is always a good conversation. Affordable and accessible housing, and then property taxes, making sure that if you are in your home, you can have programs that really help you meet your property tax burden.
So we're going to step through those one by one, but before we do, just in summary, would you say we are in great shape, good shape, okay shape, or not very good shape considering our four priorities?
We're in great shape. We have a bill alive in all four of our priority categories.
I would agree, and that doesn't mean there's not work to be done, and that for those of you watching, we're not going to need you because we will. But considering where we could have been at the halfway point, we're in very, very good shape. So let's go one by one through these, and let's start with what has probably been the highest priority for us this legislative session, although it's probably 1A to 1B, which we'll get to the next topic. But let's start with the fraud issue. Uh, we have a bill on cryptocurrency kiosk regulation. Remind folks what that's about and where it's at and what we know going forward.
Sure. As you mentioned, fraud is a huge focus for us this year, and this House Bill 1447 is just one key piece of the puzzle. Representative Swantek out of Fargo was our prime sponsor for it. What we know is that it passed 87-3 out of the House. What it does is regulate these cryptocurrency kiosks or ATMs, put some really beneficial consumer protections around it in terms of a daily transaction limit, also put some warnings on the machines about these could be used to commit fraud against you. And then there's some other language that really, we're going to fine tune a little bit, with the Department of Financial Institutions, but really giving them the tools to make sure that folks know these are not being used um, in the best way. Sometimes people are losing their life savings. So what we know, it passed in the House, and in terms of crossover, when things pass in one chamber, it's going to be sent over to the Senate, and it will be considered during the second half of the session by the Senate, and we'll be back really telling them the importance of putting these key consumer protections in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that bill's gotten a lot of attention, not just in the state of North Dakota, but I know around the country. And in fact, there was just some recent news from one of our fellow states about some additional regulations around them. So continue to learn more. We'll be back. We don't know exactly when that's going to be heard yet, but when we do, you'll know about it, and we'll want you to engage on the Senate side. Second issue, which has kind of been 1B for us, and I know it ate up a lot of time right towards the end of the first half of the session, is around prescription drug prices and lowering prescription drug prices. I'm just going to start. I know this isn't the only topic, but let's just start with the insulin cap bill, and let's just start with what I think is our preferred bill, which is 1114. So remind folks what this does and where it's at.
Sure. House Bill 1114, that bill got us to meet a lot of legislators that we hadn't visited with. We have
Sure
great
did.
partners around the table, and you and I got a tremendous amount of steps in 3 days.
20,000
Um,
steps one day. So
but what we really demonstrated is that House Bill 1114, which is the $25 cap on out-of-pocket expenses for insulin and related medical supplies, is we really demonstrated to the legislature that this is so essential to so many people, and it's a life-saving drug. And we were remarkably pleased by the result, that it did get a do not pass or a negative vote in appropriations, but because of calls, emails, one-on-one conversations with legislators, not just you and I, but really advocates
yes,
for people that rely on insulin every day. And the amount of emails that legislators received about this. You and I were hearing about it. Other colleagues were saying, wow, you really turned up the heat on this bill. But we were able to flip that on the floor, and that's pretty significant that you can take a negative recommendation and really, especially on an issue related to prescription drugs, but you can tell the legislature has really keyed into this issue and understands the importance of it. And I think that's why we saw it pass in the House.
100% agree, and happy to see that advancing. There is a companion bill we should just touch on quickly. I say companion bill. I don't, maybe competing. I don't know, but there's a Senate version of this as well. Can you explain the difference and where that's at?
Sure. So if you remember, House Bill 1114 not only keeps the coverage, the out-of-pocket expense, the $25 cap for PERS, but it also expands that to the private insurance market. The companion bill, which we could call it that, Senate Bill 2370, is the Senate version. And what it does is it continues the coverage for PERS employees only, for folks on PERS only. So it doesn't do exactly what we'd like to do, because ultimately we want everybody to have access to a cap. And House Bill 1114 really is limited in scope in terms of it's just, the people really left out of it at this point in time. It's a gap. There's about 60,000 North Dakotans that could be eligible to receive that cap. Although 2370 is good, we want to make sure that we don't go backwards, right? And I think that's the conversation we're going to have in the second half, is that current folks that are on the PERS plan have access to this $25 cap, and that's what the Senate bill does. So we want to make sure we don't go backwards, but we also want to make sure everyone has access to this cap.
I totally agree. And then I don't want to forget about, we have a study resolution or a study bill. In fact, I think that's getting heard next week, about other methods we might explore to lower prescription drug prices in the future.
It is, 20, that's, what is that
It's
one? Not 20,
1543.
that's 1543. That's Representative Lisa Meyer from Bismarck here. She has been committed to really finding solutions to lowering the cost of drugs. And I think you and I had conversations with legislators that they said, this won't fix everything. And we agree. That's why we
Totally.
figured this study would move forward. And it's going to look at the newly negotiated prices under Medicare. And could the state look at comparable prices and ultimately save money by looking at those negotiated prices? So this would be a study to look at this new program that's being rolled out at the federal level, and how could the state really, kind of latch onto it, learn from it, and potentially save money, not only for the state, but for consumers down the road. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's pivot then to the housing issue, housing and home and community-based services. Lots of, and we didn't talk a lot about these in the first half, in part because most of it is within different budget bills, and quite frankly, we were in pretty good shape, I think. So you want to just kind of give an overview of where we've ended up?
Sure. At the beginning of the legislative session, new Governor Armstrong had announced over $100 million related to housing. And like you said, they're tucked into different parts of the budget. So you can find some in the Department of Health and Human Services budget, some in the Department of Commerce budget, and then also with the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. What I want folks to know is that there are several pretty significant pieces of funding and policy moving forward, including $1 million that would help people that are currently in their homes remodel and make those homes more age friendly or accessible so they can stay there longer. There's some money for the Housing Incentive Fund that allows for more buildings to come online, more properties to come online to address the housing needs. So what we know is that housing is in really good shape, and I think it will continue to look that way moving into the towards the end of the session. So.
Absolutely. And then I think we'll pivot to the certain last but certainly not least issue. And this is probably the issue of the legislative session. I know I've been reading a number of summaries from different organizations, news articles on kind of where we're at in the legislative session, but that is the concept of property tax relief and reform, I might add, as part of it. Kind of the big vehicle seems to be House Bill 1176. That's the bill I know we've been tracking most closely. That's Governor Armstrong's kind of proposal about expanding the primary residence credit that we support, expanding the homestead property tax credit program that we support, and then has some mechanisms around putting caps on local political subdivisions that we don't have an opinion on. But the House, I thought, took an interesting tact, and I'm curious if you've got any thoughts, that they actually passed two other property tax relief / reform bills right at the close of the session too, and sent three packages over to the Senate. So any insight onto where this might be headed?
Well, I think what it tells us is that the legislature has heard North Dakota residents, right? That North Dakota residents want relief, want reform. And so I think no idea is a bad idea at this point in time. This will probably be one of the last bills that they decide on towards the end of the session. But I think the legislature is committed to finding ways, to offset the cost of property taxes. They're committed to it. They're having some really interesting conversations. I think ultimately one bill will be the vehicle, and they might take parts of the other bills that the House, because there's great ideas out there, and they could have a
Yeah.
combination of all of those. But that's when it gets really down to the final days of the session, when you have conference committees and you get the House and the Senate together to really get their ideas together in one bill and one package. So
Absolutely. So, well, let's pivot to next week. When do they come back next week? And what's the biggest thing we're watching for next week?
well, they will be back on March 5th, which is Wednesday. There'll only be committee hearings next week. They aren't going to actually gavel in for floor sessions. So if you're interested in committee hearings, this is the week to do it. They will be in committee pretty much the entire day. The one bill we're watching is House Bill 1543, which is in Senate Human Services. And that's the conversation about let's study the Medicare negotiated prices, learn from it, learn from the process, look at ways we can save consumers in the state money down the road. So.
Absolutely. And if folks want to learn more about our advocacy agenda or see an update of where all these priorities are, where can they do that, Janelle?
Well, we have given them a great sheet. So if they don't want to listen to the two of us talk, they can go and read a one-pager that gives them an outline of our priorities and the updated pieces of where bills stand and how to find links and read the bills and follow the actions. So you can go at aarp.org/Andy Advocacy. Everything is there at your fingertips.
Absolutely. So, well, this has been a Friday. It's been a halfway point. We're both in much more relaxed gear than we have been in previous versions of this. And so we'll be back next Friday and Fridays until the legislature, adjourns, because this has been another All Things Advocacy with AARP North Dakota.